Yeah, execution, which means to put somebody to death by the government after proper trials. That is to 怎么说？处死刑. Okay, so we talk. I just the word came to me. The word execution and the executioner's song. That was a book written by Norman Mailer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about new journalism. And last time I talked about cicada. At the end of the class, and my computer was not doing well, so I did not really finish the class well because we could not open some of the slides. I just happened to find this David Attenborough's video on YouTube. It's a very short story about cicada's life cycle, and that explains very well to you how the cicada's life cycle is. Let's go to this. These are all the words we're going to go through, and there's nothing that I spelled wrong last time, so we'll just dive right into it. The first word is fraudulent. Fraudulent is a very common word. It comes from the word fraud. Fraud means to do something by cheating, something that is not the right thing to do, or it's incorrect, but you try to cheat others, you committed fraud. And fraudulence is the adjective that means you are actually trying to cheat somebody by doing something. So I don't have very much to say, but this is a common word. You probably should learn this word if you don't know yet. So the next word is the next item is birth name of an immigrant. Last time we talked about Harry Houdini, and I said I did not look into it, but I'm sure this was not his real name. And sure enough, I found out his original name was Eric Weiss. Later, he had other different names. Basically, the last name was Weiss, which probably means white. But that's because I thought Weiss means white in German. However, I looked into it, and he was a Hungarian-born American. He was born here, like many of your children were born here. Some were not, of course. So we are all immigrants, and our names do not fit well in their custom. So for Chinese, we often encounter the situation where American people would have difficulty pronouncing our names. For example, it's like Shun or Yan, or many of our words they just could not pronounce. Like my last name, they would always say Wang as Wan, or Chen as Qian, or such things. So we would like to fit in, to not give them too much trouble. So many of us try to change our names in order for other people to be able to pronounce easily. Another thing we are also concerned with is, especially if we are people like Houdini, who want to be a popular entertainer, they want their names to be easy to remember and sounds great and fit in this culture. So he apparently thought his last name was not good. Weiss is not English, and he changed to the word Houdini. I don't know where he got that name, but Harry is certainly not his first name, but it's much easier to pronounce.
Oh yeah,
Excuse
hi
me.
Joe.
And
Excuse me.
yes.
There's something black the slide on the right side. Can you move? mm,
Oh,
Move
really? Okay, that's good. I can
move a
certainly do
little.
that.
The right side, the right one.
Uh, yes, I know that is my panel. I just happened to find this panel of participants for many, many months. I was complaining that I couldn't
Oh,
see myself. Now today I suddenly find myself. So I was happy. Apparently I'm blocking your view too. So now I don't have to see myself. Okay. And now I can see that too. Yeah. The Harry Houdini, we had his name as a Erich Weiss or Harry Weiss. Yeah. These are his original names, but in order for him to become a popular American entertainer, he chose to change his name to Harry Houdini. And this process is called anglicize, to make something which is foreign into something that is more English-like. Anglo, Anglo is the the race of people who used to live in around London is called the Anglicans and Anglese. These are the word that was the origin of the word English. So to make something English, the verb is to anglicize. So you have your name anglicized into a new name. Like many of my Chinese friends, they are called Mary, John, or Robert. Those were not their names, but they just adapted those names in order for people to pronounce easily. That's called anglicize your name. You can anglicize your name or your custom, your culture, your pronunciation, the spelling, or style. There are a lot of things in your life that you can make some changes so that people from an English cultural background would get used to your uh, things easily. So that's called anglicize. uh, excuse me, I'm really having problems today. Anyway, let's go on. And when I look at Harry Houdini's last name, I knew immediately that I know a girl who had the last name, and that is this girl. Hey, it's not giving it to me. Okay. Uh, Maybe some of you knew her, and the other day I was talking to my sister, and she knew this girl, and it's a lovely movie star whose name is Rachel Weisz. And when I look into her background, her father was from Hungary. Her mother was from Vienna, which is the capital of Austria. So they were both from Central Europe, and they moved to London when they were children in 1938. And uh, they were both Jewish. In 1938, they were afraid to stay in their own country because Nazi Germany is going to invade them. That's why they escaped to the United Kingdom. That's the story of Rachel Weisz. And the most notable thing about her right now is she is married to Daniel Craig, and they got married in 2011. And that's a picture of them. And I hope you would recognize who Daniel Craig is. And he is the current 007 James Bond. Okay. And let's look at some of the immigrants who had their names changed. Barack Hussein Obama II used to be Barry. When he was in college, he felt that people did not like him when they called him Barack Hussein Obama. So he changed his name to Barry. Whether legally or not, I don't know. Maybe he just told his friends that they could call him Barry because it's so much easier to pronounce. Maybe he did not go through the process, the legal process to change the name. And that's one thing. If you want to be a big politician, you better not have your middle name spelled out as Hussein, as he always tried to avoid that. And Jon Stewart is a comedian on Comedy Central, and his last name was Leibowitz. Now, Leibowitz is definitely a Jewish last name, and if you want to be a big TV star, you probably would like to change that. And in his case, he just used his first name and middle name, and those are close enough to be anglicized. So he called himself Jon Stewart, and forget about the word Leibowitz. Irving Berlin, we sang at least one song before in the class, and he was from Russia, and he was a Jew. So far we'd had quite a few names that I just mentioned. They were Jewish people. They did not like people to know that they're Jewish. So Irving Berlin, his name was Israel Bailey. He changed it to Irving Berlin, which is very, very anglicized. And Bob Hope, you all know Bob Hope, who's a comedian. He's passed away already, but he was once very, very famous. And his name was Leslie Hape. So he changed it to Bob Hope. So they're short and snappy and very much English name. Huh? Another movie star was called Claudette Colbert. She was born Lily Chauchuan, I suppose. So she was French, but the name was very difficult to pronounce. She did not want to hide that she was having a French background. So she changed to still a French kind of last name, which is Colbert. If you're an English person or Irish person, you would call it a Colbert. But Claudette Colbert, she wanted people to remember that she's French. So she changed to the name Colbert, and she would ask people to pronounce it as Colbert, so that she, as a movie star, would have the appearance that she was from France, which is very exotic but glamorous at the same time. So she tossed her original French name and chose a new name, Claudette Colbert. And she was a very famous movie star, and she won an Oscar for It Happened One Night with Clark Gable. And that movie, It Happened One Night, won the 4 biggest Oscars of that year, which would be Best Picture, Best Director, Best Leading Female Actor, and the Male Actor. So in the history of Oscars, that was a great sweep, winning the 4 biggest awards. And that, I don't know which year, maybe 1945. I'm just throwing in a wild guess. I don't know which year, but it was around that time. But it would be the next time it happened that a movie won 4 of the biggest Oscars of the year was One Flew Cuckoo's Nest. 我们中文可能叫做飞越杜鹃窝哈。We got Michael Douglas I'm sorry, Michael Douglas was a producer, so he won the Best Picture award, and the actor was Jack Nicholson. And there's Louise Fletcher, who won the Best Actress and the Best Director. I think it was Mike Nichols movie. So these are the two outstanding movies that won 4 biggest Oscars of the year. It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, here comes a big name, Rudolph Valentino. I bet probably most of you have never seen one of his movies, but he was one of the greatest silent movie stars. 我们说他是一个情圣, handsome young man, and many women loved him very much. 他的名字叫做鲁道夫·范伦铁诺. Okay, and he was born. I don't even want to attempt to read his name. His original name was this long: Rodolfo Alfonso Raffaello Pierre Filibert Guglielmi di Valentina Dantoguola, probably with Italian origin. But in order for you to be a popular idol, a movie star, you cannot use a name like that. So he changed his name to Rudolph Valentino, which is part of his original name. But at the same time, a Valentino is a famous name for someone who's a womanizer. So he really want to stick to that original name. Let me put the word womanizer here. It's womanizer. A man who's 很花心, he wants to have all kinds of girlfriends and mistresses, is called a womanizer. Valentino is in the older stories, there was a Valentino, I suppose, who was a womanizer. There was another one called Don Juan, Tang Huang. That's a Spanish womanizer. And the last one on our list is Johnny Weissmuller. He was born Johann Weissmuller, but he changed Johann to Johnny, which is the same name. But if you say Johann, that means you were from Germany or something. And at that time, it's not good to be associated with Germany. So he changed his first name to Johnny. And I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was very, very popular. He was an Olympic athlete, and he later on became a movie star, and he played Tarzan in all Tarzan movies. 泰山夺宝, 泰山得子, 泰山什么. He was in many of those Tarzan movies because he has this great physique. He was strong and good bodybuilder, so he looked really great when he was not wearing anything, playing Tarzan. Okay, let me go down the list again. So these are people who were immigrant, and I thought it rings a bell to us, who most of us have changed our names. When I talked about this movie star Claudette Colbert, I think of Stephen Colbert. He is currently a comedian at one of the greatest midnight show. He's on the Colbert Show, or I think it's called the Colbert Show. He evidently, he was a Colbert. He was Irish, and he had nothing to do with French. But he thought, just to poke fun at his audience, he would use this name, which is a little bit harder to pronounce. Yeah, it's a reverse way. He had an anglicized last name, but he wanted to throw in a dash of flair by asking people to call him Colbert. So that's just for the fun of it. He's a comedian, a writer, a producer, political commentator, actor, and a television host. I think right now he's hosting one of the 11 o'clock p.m. Not a news host, but more of a comedy host. He is 15, 30, he is 16th here, huh? Look at this. He is mostly Irish. So of his 16 grandparents, only one is not Irish. And this one person is not French either. It's his paternal great grandmother was half German and half English. So he is not 100% Irish, but almost is like 80% or more than 80% Irish. But he chose to have his last name pronounced the French way, just to have some fun. And so why do people change names in addition to having a name people cannot pronounce, or in addition to having a Jewish name that they did not want people to know they're Jewish? And there are many other reasons to change your names. One is if you're a woman, you probably have a last name now that's different from your original last name. So that your original last name is called the maiden name. 我们叫做娘家的姓哈，中文还有没有别的字？ That is the last name you were born with, but you had to abandon that name or put that into the middle name in order to use your husband's last name as your legal last name. Huh? More and more people nowadays do not do that anymore. But when I came to this country and got married, I changed my last name to Huang, and my maiden name was Wang. And when you introduce some woman to other people, you would say her last name is, say, Robert, but her maiden name was, say, Smith. So the maiden name is the name of your own parents, your father's last name. And now it's no longer your last name, and you're using your husband's last name. So in French, you would say your maiden name is something else, and you say Ney, N-E or N-E-E, huh? If you are a man and your last name used to be, say, Robert, then you would say Ney Robert. If you're a woman, you would say Ney, but with another E, which means you are a female, but your original last name was something. Huh? So in a sentence, you would say, this is Miss Mary Louise and Ney Smith. Her last name used to be Smith. You would say Ney Smith. That's how these words are used. Of course, many people are women who change their last name. So this N-E-E is used much more often than N-E because very few men had to change their last name. But women almost, a very high percentage of women used to have a different last name. And there are also other situations when you want to change your name. For example, if your parents were divorced or you were adopted by some other new parent, then you may or may not change your last name to a different one. And nowadays you also have gender transition. For example, if you're a man and you changed into a woman, then you don't want people to call you John Roberts. You probably want people to call you Roberta Roberts, or I'm sorry, John. You could call yourself something like John, I don't know, Joanna. Okay, so you would like to change your name because your gender is changed. Gender 就是你的性别. You were a boy, now you're a girl, or you were a girl, now you're a boy. Then you do need to change your name. Recently, there is a movie star called I forgot her name. Page. Ellen Page. Okay, Ellen Page was in the movie Juno, or Inception, or Hard Candy. She was in many movies, and she was young and a very attractive woman. Her first name was Ellen, Ellen, but now she came out as a transgender. She's no longer a girl. She is a boy now. So her first name is now Elliot. They would choose some names that are somewhat similar to their original name. So you would have Elliot Page. And we used to have an Olympic athlete, decathlon. Decathlon was the sports that he played. Just like Yang Chuanguang, decathlon would be a 十项全能. And in the 70s, I think 70s, we had American decathlon athlete. Let me see, what's his name? He's now Caitlin. Bruce Jenner.
Bruce Jenner.
Bruce Jenner was his name. Yes, Bruce was his first name, and Jenner. Of course, when he changed to a girl, to a woman, he is still called Jenner, but his first name is now Caitlin. So these are the occasions when you have a sex change. Then you usually would like to change at least your first name, so that people would not feel frozen when they hear the name and look at you. Okay. And there is another kind of different thing, the last item here. Matters are very different in some cultures in which a birth name is for childhood only. And that refers partly to Chinese people. Many Chinese people were born with one name, and 我们叫它乳名 or baby name, and everyone in kindergarten or elementary school probably would call him one name. And then when they grow up, they have 学名 a grown-up name. I don't quite understand that. I did not, at least in the beginning, because it didn't happen to me. I was given a name and I used that name in all the school years. But I heard that when I heard one of Gong Li's movie, I don't know which one it was, 大概是活着, to live. In that movie, it says times are so tough, people are dying left and right. Life is not precious. And if you have a child, and the child will die very soon. So what's the name of giving him a good name? You might as well just call him 小猫小狗, whatever you like. And when you're so sure that he would survive, then you take the trouble of finding a very good name for him. And in that case, in that movie, they say, if you have a good name, the bad people or devils or whatever would say, oh, here's a new boy with a name and we want to kill this. So in order to avoid a child being called, you should not give him a formal name. You should just call him 包子馒头 or whatever, 小狗小猫. Then the devil would not know there's a new boy they could kill. So that's why you give them a childhood name instead of a real good name. So when I saw that, I remember that some of the Chinese do use a third-rate name temporarily for a child until this child really survived and was able to go to school or go into business or whatever. Then they would go to the go through the trouble of giving the child a real name. Okay, that's a funny thing to say. Here's the word doggerel, which means 打油诗, huh? These two words were totally invented separately. It's not that some Chinese say, oh, they call it doggerel, so we call it 打油诗. No, it's not so at all. We had 打油诗 for many, many centuries, and they had the word doggerel, which comes from the word dog, to describe a short poem which is not elegantly composed, which is very vulgar, and it doesn't rhyme very well, and maybe doesn't follow the proper poetry rules, but it's just a fun thing to do, and you can have a laugh. So we call that a 打油诗, huh? Or in English you would say doggerel. It is a poetry that is irregular, which means it does not follow the good rules. When they're doing the rhyming, 在押韵的时候没有那么工整的押韵, huh? Often deliberately for burlesque or comic effect. To make joke of something, they would write a simple and a crappy, not good poem in order to get a laugh. That's called a 打油诗, huh? Alternatively, it can mean verse, which has a monotonous rhythm, easy rhyme, and a cheap or trivial meaning. Actually, it's just, I wouldn't say that's alternatively. This kind of poems would not rhyme very well, and it does not have an inspiring philosophy, and it has very little meaning. It's just for a daily joke. So this is not great literary work. Okay, it's called 打油诗, and it's called doggerel. And sometimes we call that a ditty or a jingle. These are not necessarily a doggerel. It can be just a little song, or when we say jingle, it's always used for a commercial. For example, when you were in Taiwan, you would watch TV with lots of TV commercial, and they would repeat a lot of the commercials. So everybody knows that song, but that's not a good song. There was once we had a composer whose name was Lin Fuyu, and he wrote many songs. Some are folk songs, but he wrote a lot of jingles for commercial use. For example, 大同电锅, whatever. And yeah, so if you grew up watching TV, you could sing many, many of his jingles. Those were not something that he was very proud of, but it's got popularity. So ditty and jingles are short verse or tunes, little songs. There's an example of this word, for example, the Acme mattress ditty has been stuck in my head all day. The speaker of this sentence, he just heard on the mattress commercial on the TV or on the radio, and that little song, that ditty, was stuck in my head all day. 这个歌 it's not a great big wonderful song, but it's stuck in my head and I couldn't get rid of it. That kind of song is, or music, is called worm. Worm, W-O-R-M. That it means any kind of song. It could be a great song, it could be a very simple or bad song, but it has the habit of getting into your head. Then you would repeat that all day through. Your head was spinning with this song, just because it's got that characteristic that tends to repeat in your head all the time. This is a ditty or a jingle. Okay, here's the word vaudeville. There's no simple translation of this word. So I would say it is a 歌舞杂耍表演滑稽通俗喜剧. This is a kind of show that to entertain, and it may have some acrobatic features and may have some comedic features, making fun so that people would laugh. So this kind of show is usually in short sections, not a grand or long opera or stage play, but little pieces. And it consists of many small parts. This entire paragraph I gave to you last time, so we don't have to repeat. It just contains all sorts of acts that could be incorporated in such kind of show. And the person who is in this kind of show is called a vaudevillian. Among all those acts, one of them is called the ventriloquism. Okay, I think ventri has something to do with your body part, your stomach or your abdomen or whatever, or maybe the chest. A person who could speak by pronouncing a voice seemingly not through the throat is called a ventriloquist. 就是会讲术语、腹语的人哈。And this kind of person who usually performs with his own voice and a second voice, which you could not tell where it came from, and that is from other parts of his body, but he kind of throws it out there, so you feel that the voice comes from a different place. And he would usually hold a dummy, which is a puppet, 一个这叫什么？我一时说不出中文叫什么，就是就像布袋戏啊，或者是
木偶吗？
木偶是可以的，或者是 made of fabric, so it's not necessarily made of wood 哈。木偶就好像这个Pinocchio 就是一个木偶哈，我们叫匹诺曹 Pinocchio is made of wood, but sometimes there are puppeteers that are puppets that are made of cloth. You could put it over your hand and do like this, or you could do it like this with some sticks and strings tied to the puppet, and you control that way. And that kind of puppetry is called a marionette. And to call them simply, you don't say puppet or marionette, you just say dummy, because this is something who's a person, but he could not speak. We call it dummy. Dummy 现在可以说是一种笨的人，或者说不会讲话的人哈，哑子 dumb 就是 D-U-M-B 是个哑子哈。So a ventriloquist has a dummy who doesn't speak, but the audience thought he could speak, because you, as a ventriloquist, you provide a second voice that people think you're carrying on a conversation with a dummy, but actually you're talking to yourself. Here's the word throw. That means you, as a ventriloquist, you throw your voice out there so that people think the dummy is speaking in that voice, but actually it is your voice. But in our Chinese traditional folk performances, this is not a very common act. We have 口技. In my elementary school, around my grades, there was one boy who could do 口技, and he was really, really good. And we think he probably, I did not know at the time. At that time, I have never heard of the word ventriloquist. So I don't know how he did it, but it's usually one person performing behind a screen, and you hear lots of voices chatting around. And for example, they pretend there's a fire, and the people would be running around yelling and calling. It's all from him one person. So it is certain that he has some kind of skill that could control several voices chatting at the same time, or making very loud noise like the sirens of the police car and so on. That's quite remarkable. But in our Chinese vaudeville shows, we could see lots of acrobatic shows. I'm going to show you lots of other things. Some are traditionally Chinese, but some are not. This is Edgar Bergen. Edgar Bergen is a man with a sick head. I say sick, I don't mean that his head is sick in any way. I mean that kind of wrapped cloth is 吸金人是这样的哈 SIKH, I think that's how it's spelled. But he pretend to be a man from some exotic places, so he had a headband like that. And he was born in 1903 and died in 1978. And his best known sidekick, if there's a show with two people, one is the major playing the leading role, and the other guy, just like Sherlock Holmes, he's the leading guy in all the Sherlock Holmes stories, novels, but there's a sidekick whose name is Dr. Watson. He doesn't do much, but Sherlock Holmes talked to him all the time so that you know what Sherlock Holmes is thinking. This is traditionally one way to tell you a story about somebody, but they give him a sidekick so that they would talk between themselves and you would know what this person is thinking. If he's a cowboy riding on a horseback and never had a sidekick like Tonto, then people will not know what he plans to do, what's his character, and so on. So having a sidekick is a wonderful vehicle for storytelling, because then you have two people to play around with this narrative. So this is Charlie McCarthy, who is definitely not a real person, but he's a dummy, and Edgar Bergen. And they were extremely popular for about 20 years, from 1937 to 1956. He was the #1 program on the nights it aired. He was on radio quite often, and always when he's on radio, everybody wants to listen to him instead of to any other programs. And last time I told you that Edgar Bergen has a beautiful daughter, Candice Bergen. Here is Candice Bergen on the left-hand side, and Edgar Bergen's wife, Frances, on the right-hand side. So both are very beautiful and elegant women. And I hope you still remember, I told you about Candice when she made her, not the first movie, but the second movie. She was actually 20 years old, and she was in Taiwan making that movie. So when I was in school, she was about my age. So when she was 20, I was 21 maybe. So when she was in Taiwan, I was in college. I knew that she was in Keelung when they were filming that movie, and that movie was called The Sand Pebbles. In 1966, she was in The Sand Pebbles, and these are some of her movies. She made a lot of movies, but these are very well known, and she is beautiful, and she could act somewhat, but she's not a top-notch actress. She could just be there and carry the story, but she could not do the agonizing or evil or whatever. She was not a great actress, so she later became on TV more often than not, and she had a runaway hit as Murphy Brown from 1988 to 1998. For 10 or 11 years, Murphy Brown was one of the very top shows on TV. She is very, how to say, she has the heart of an activist. She wants to advocate something. So it's quite political most of the time. And she would, at one time she was dating a White House photographer, David something. They did not get married, but she was everywhere. She was very popular and she was advocating a lot of different things. So she became very famous. But she had a father who had a dummy as the best friend, and she was really jealous. So this is The Sand Pebbles, filmed in Geelong with Steve McQueen. And the girl here is Candice Bergen. And this is about a ship. It's not a military Navy ship. It is a commercial American ship on Yangtze River, going in deep into the country to get some missionary people onto the ship so they can leave the country, because the country was in chaos with lots of people trying to kill foreigners. And Candice Bergen was playing a very young girl in the mission as a Christian person, of course. And Steve McQueen was not necessarily a Navy sailor, but a commercial sailor, but representing America to evacuate this the missionaries. He died in the movie later. And these are some of the famous Candice Bergen movies. When she was quite young, she was in many of the great movies with famous actors. Like this one is Mike Nichols is a director, and Jack Nicholson is the leading actor. It's called Carnal Knowledge. And it's this movie very uniquely, it has Arthur Garfunkel in the movie. So Arthur Garfunkel, who is one of the Simon and Garfunkel band, they did many, many famous songs like The Sound of Silence, like it all escapes me. Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Troubled Water, yeah.
Bridge Over Troubled Water, or
Silent Night.
Sound of Silence.
Mm-hmm.
Sound of Silence, yeah.
Yeah, Sound of Silence.
This
They
Robinson.
were very popular. This Peruvian song called what? Condor Pasha. Condor Pasha. I'd rather be a hammer than a nail. Okay, that was one of the Peruvian folk songs. Anyway, so this is a unique movie in that Art Garfunkel was in movie maybe twice or three times. Very rarely he was a movie star in this movie. On the right-hand side, you have Sean Connery as a Moroccan, you may say, terrorist who kidnapped Candice Bergen, who's a widow, called The Wind and the Lion. Of course, the wind is Candice Bergen and the lion is Sean Connery. And Oliver's Story is the sequel of Love Story. Love Story was immensely popular. At the end, Ally McGraw died. So the sequel has to have a new girl, and that was played by Candice Bergen. And the Gandhi is immensely popular movie, won so many Oscars. And it was directed by Richard Attenborough, who played a soldier who's a friend of Steve McQueen in this movie. So they all became friends, and later we got together to make another movie. And in this movie, Candice Bergen played Life magazine photographer. She went to India to take picture of Gandhi. So she was, Candice Bergen was in this minor role playing Margaret White, who was a photographer sent by Life magazine. It's only in the 10 minutes, first 10 minutes of the movie, and she never appeared again in this very long movie, which run probably 3 hours. So, but she was nominated for Oscar, and she won some other awards for doing that very small role. Okay. So her father died in 1978, and in her memoir, which is called A Fine Romance, she mentioned how she was left out of his will. So his father was immensely popular, but did not give her anything, any money when he died. And what did he give to her? He left his dummy Charlie McCarthy to Candice Bergen, which made her very, very angry, because all throughout her childhood, she was jealous that her father loved that dummy more than he loved her.
Still get on Candice Bergen.
She felt that her father had a stronger bond with Charlie than her. Okay, this is quite devastating for a little girl. Now I'm going to talk about various acrobatic acts in a vaudeville show. When I talk about juggler, which is like this, juggle, just you throw several things in the air and you keep throwing one again and again, so that all these would continuously being in the air. That is called juggle, but I could not find any Chinese translation for this. All I can find is called 杂技, 杂耍. That's not a specific act. So you should know that juggler is a person in such kind of entertainment show that throw things into the air and to catch them constantly so that nothing drops. Around Christmas time, we always had brothers Karamazov here. They do a lot of juggling. And some of my coworker went there, and they always say that the show asked audience to bring in strange things so that they could show how they do it on something that they've never touched before. One of my coworkers said one of the people in their audience brought a big octopus greased with oil. So it's very hard to throw, or maybe more than one, I don't know. But these are things that they never practiced using that before, but they would try to show you how they do it. There was a book that I borrowed from the library telling you how to do it. And eventually I did not succeed, but I tell you how to do it. Maybe you can do it too. And in order to practice for juggling, you would stand yourself in front of a wall, very close, and you try to throw things. And the purpose is you don't throw it too far away so that you cannot catch. There is a big wall, and you throw the things between you and the wall so that they would always be not too far away so that you cannot catch. Okay, now you know how to do it. Okay, to throw several objects up into the air and then catch and throw them up repeatedly so that one or more stays in the air, usually in order to entertain people. Okay, that's the definition of this kind of act. And we often, I recommend you to learn this word because it is now used in our ordinary life. We would say, there's a sentence at the bottom of this slide. It says, many parents find it hard to juggle children and a career. So parents had to take care of their children and home, and they have a career out there. So they're just like a juggler. Every day they try to take care of these things and don't want to leave anything falling to the ground. So that would be the word juggle, to juggle children and a career. So these are the people who are throwing these things. These are probably much easier to catch than some other things. If it's a ball, it's too small. If it's a long stick, it's larger. You can catch any part of it. And to the back of these people in the front, there are 2 or 3 people in the back, and they were on how do you call that? 说不出来。我们这个踩高跷哈，on stilts. Okay, stilts. 一下子想不出来哈。This word is called the stilts, stilt, and often you would add s to it. If you go to the tropical area where there was often huge floods, then the houses would be built on stilts. What does that mean? The house does not sit on the ground. They're built on tall sticks. Have you seen those kind of houses? I was in one such house in Peru, but you could see that in Asia too, Southeast Asia. There are many houses that are built on stilts. Then in this case, we have this jugglers who stood on stilts. You can see this guy is standing on stilts. Okay, those are called the stilts. That would make it infinitely harder to be juggling because you have to watch out and don't fall off the stilts. For the word 杂技特技, a more generalized name would be acrobatics. 那个就是有各种特技表演的意思哈。Acrobatics is a much general term for stunts instead of juggler. Jugglers are juggling one particular thing, but acrobatic includes all kinds of different performances. Acrobatics is the performance of human feats of balance, agility, and motor coordination. So here he named 3 things that acrobats do. They want to show balance. For example, they're on stilts, but they don't fall off, so they have good balance. Or they could be on a tight rope. They could walk from one building to another in thin air with a string underneath or a cable underneath. So they have to show great balance because if you fall off, then that's the end of it. Agility means being very fast to react to things. I know some people send their dogs to agility training so that the dog would be more active or I don't know, more responsive to your call or whatever. And the motor coordination, anything we do with our arms and the legs and the hands, these are motor movement, 就是怎么样的动作, and in order to coordinate your different hands, for example, you would throw this and catch it with the other hand, or you can use your chopsticks. Well, you have to move your fingers so coordinated that they can together accomplish the act of putting food in your mouth. 这些都是 motor coordination. So these are some pictures I found. You could be on the ring hanging with your feet and do some kinds of stunts. And these are people who would be thrown over in the air and be caught by other people who are stacked up there, ready to catch you. We've seen this kind of acts either in Taiwan or in China or or in America, or in Cirque du Soleil, 哈，那个中文不知叫什么太阳的什么马戏团哈。They are very, very good, and many of the members were recruited from China. And this is a kind of horse riding, but you're doing kind of stunt on it. Your head is here and your legs are there, and you're hanging there while the horse was racing very fast. And this is a kind of a ribbon show. They have this ribbon, very long silk ribbon hanging there, and the person would untangle her legs or arms around it and doing all kinds of shows. And here's a tightrope. I was talking about a tightrope. And this is probably torches that were lit with fire, and you throw it around, and you better be able to catch it, otherwise it drops on the floor and the things would get burned. And this is the one person lying there and sticking her arms out, and another person is on there, and they could put some kind of chair on top, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I was in a great circus show in Moscow, and they have this stadium bigger than Madison Square Garden, huge shows filled with people, tens of thousands of people, night after night. They would do all kinds of circus entertainment. This is called a trapeze, 空中飞人. First, you have two swings coordinated in certain ways so that one person could just jump over and be caught by the other person. And then it's on the right-hand side, you have a more complicated show with 3 people. That's the end of the acrobatic shows. Now we have the word elicit, which is to draw something out, or to extract it out, or to pull it out, or to reel it off. It is a common word, but not very commonly used. This is Tennessee Williams, and I was talking about Cat on the Hot Tin Roof. That was one of his very famous plays. He lived to be 72. He and 2 other playwrights, Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller, the 3 of them were very, very famous for a while in the middle of 20th century. And they are the serious ones. They're not entertaining. They're not writing jokes such as Neil Simon, but they're writing about family trouble, tragedies, and what else? Conflict. They're always fighting, or suicide. Yeah, okay. He wrote quite a lot of plays, but these are the most famous. Many of them were not famous. The first one is Glass Menagerie. I came across that very early on in one of Cui Xiaoping's 广播剧. The Glass Menagerie is about a young girl who's very quiet and having no boyfriend. So the brother brought home a young man to have dinner so that the girl could get acquainted with some other people. However, this young man is already has a girlfriend. So I think he's from the South, and all his stories are about people in the South. The people in the American South are more poorer, not educated well, the very conservative, and they are more drama worthy for a playwright to write about, because they are agonizing all the time. Okay, A Streetcar Named Desire is, of course, extremely famous. 欲望街车. By the way, I saw Katharine Hepburn playing the matron in Glass Menagerie with Kirk Douglas as the young man, a gentleman caller. Yeah. But Streetcar Named Desire would have Marlon Brando and Vivian Lee. Summer and the Smoke probably had I try not to be caught in the middle of not remembering the names. Anyway, those were all made into movies. The Rose Tattoo I saw with Burt Lancaster. I think it's got an Italian woman in it. Yeah, I know exactly which one, but I forgot the name. Kid on a Hot Tin Roof. Yeah, with I told you last time with Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor. Orpheus Descending would be, well, I mean, by the name, it's a Greek mythology, a story of Greek mythology, but I think it is still about the South. And like Eugene O'Neill had The Morning Become Electra, that's a great Greek mythology, but he's talking about a Southern family. It is just using the structure of a Greek mythology to write about a modern day American story. Suddenly last summer, I saw Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift in that movie about a gay man being clobbered to death in some, well, as a tourist. And I can also mention that Tennessee Williams is gay himself. Sweet Bird of Youth, Night of Iguana. Oh, these are all very complicated stories. You're not going there to watch a show for fun, huh? These are not fun movies, plays, or, yeah. Richard Burton was in Night of the Iguana. Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone had Warren Beatty as a young man and Vivian Lee as the older woman. The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore had Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, but that was toward the end of Tennessee Williams' artistic life, so that was not a very good play. Procrastinate is a word that is pretty long, but if you can, please remember this word. It's very, very useful. Procrastinate, because human nature is to procrastinate, to delay something just because you're lazy or you don't want to be bothered or it's not yet urgent. That's the word procrastinate. Here's the word 笃心, which you don't have to know at all. However, this word is now in everyday life. So you have to learn that, okay? To galvanize is to excite some other people so that they would be so stirred up. So you galvanize it. What do they do? For example, the soldiers were lost. They lost the battle. So they were very, very sad and demoralized. 就是他的士气已经没有了，这叫做 demoralize. I'm sorry, there's an L somewhere. Demoralize. Moral 就是道德哈。我们要 boost the person's morale， 就是要鼓舞士气。And these people, they lost. 他们没有士气了，就叫做 demoralized. When that happens, a great leader would try to galvanize them, to encourage them, to shock them, to stimulate them, so they would again collect their courage and march forward. This is not a simple word, but it is a word, a verb that's used to describe something or an event. For example, 9/11 is something that galvanized the American people so that they become all against the Muslims, I guess. Whether it's a good cause or not, this is the verb to use to say that people were shocked and stimulated into the mood to stride forward, okay? So that's called galvanize. Similar words would be animate, startle, and urge. Zinc deficiency, I don't want you to read into the detail. There is a kind of medical condition called zinc deficiency. So if you are lacking this kind of element, you may have certain kind of problem, such as 消化也不对啊，或者是 skin, skeletal, or the immune, whatever. You can look into that. But in order not to be deficient in this kind of metal, this element, zinc, you can eat oysters, meats, beans, and nuts. Okay, so we're all set. We can eat that, which we like. Yeah, I just mentioned in the beginning that there's such a book called The Executioner's Song. It was written by Norman Mailer, and he is one of the trailblazers doing a thing called new journalism. They were trained to be journalists, and they were trained to be novelists. So they use their skills from both sides of their skills. They could go investigate something as a journalist, but they write something with the skills of a novelist. They spin the story, they explore the people's characters, and they tell you all the background about this news story. So it is considered novels written by journalists who went out to do lots of research and tell you the whole story about a news person, a person in news. In this case, this story is somebody who killed somebody, and somebody is called Gary Gilmore. He killed a woman, and he was in trial, and he was sentenced to death, and his lawyers wanted to appeal, but he said, no, I want to die instead, and he was executed. So Norman Mailer spent many, many hours or days or years. He spent a lot of time investigating, interviewing all of Gary Gilmore's friends and relatives and so on, and he wrote this really, really a huge book called The Executioner's Song. So I would tell you several of such people. They were journalists and they were novelists, and they combined these two art forms and wrote detailed investigative stories of real life people, quite often murderers, and became bestsellers and win all kinds of awards because these books are really well written. In this case, it's Norman Mailer who wrote the story about a convicted murderer, Gary Gilmore, who chose to die. This is some kind of a big deal because there had been no execution in the United States between 1965 and 1977. So there was a time when there were executions, 处死刑的时候的事情. But between 65 and 77, there were nobody who were executed because many states banned, and in fact, all the states banned execution. But after that, they started to execute people again, and some states still forbid executing criminals, but some remarkably, Texas is by far the group having the greatest number of death row criminals being executed all the time. So this is kind of a controversial thing, and Norman Mailer wrote this book because at that time there were no people being executed until then. and he was sentenced to die, and he chose to die. And it was made into a movie with Tommy Lee Jones, who won an Emmy for the role. So that's a TV movie, with some other people. It was made in 1982. Tommy Lee Jones is a very well-respected actor. The second writer is called Norm. This is the first writer, Norman Mailer. I want to talk a little bit about him, and then I would introduce you to some other people. Norman Mailer, these are all young men or young women in the beginning. Of course, now they're dying off. This one died in 2007. He was a novelist, journalist, essayist. Essay 就是写散文的或者写论文的哈。Playwright, he wrote play for people to put on the show on stage. All these people I'm going to introduce to you, they are journalists and they are novelists, and they would write plays by turning their novels into plays, and they would write movie scripts by turning their stories into movies. So these people are even though they are writers, they are all connected with the movie industry. So he himself is an actor too. This is what new journalism is called. It's got several different names. You can call it creative nonfiction. So it is nonfiction. That means the story is true, but you put something creative inside it. So it's a kind of a marriage between novels and the news items. Okay, so these are called the new journalism, and the people in that business at that time, they were all new into the field. There are Truman Capote and Joan Didion, Hunter S. Thompson, and Tom Wolfe, and Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer is very distinct in that he worked a long time. He was died at age 84. So he had a long life, and he really took advantage of his long life. He worked for 6 decades, because he worked over 60 years, and he had 11 best-selling books. People having best-selling books is not unusual, but he had at least one best-selling book in each of the 7 decades after World War II. So after he turned 20, every 10 years, he had at least one best-selling book for 7 decades. Isn't that amazing? Into his 80s, he still writes very, very good books, okay? Now let's talk about these different people. The first one, the second one, of course, is Truman Capote. Truman Capote, I bet you have seen his work, definitely. He lived to be 60 years old. That's not very long, so it's possible he died of AIDS because he was gay, and 1984 was the time when lots of gay men died, but I should not speculate until I find it out whether it's true. So he's a novelist, a screenwriter, a playwright, and actor. So he was in some play as well. In the beginning, he writes short stories, and there's a collection. That was his first short story collection, which includes a novella. A small novel is called a novella. Here's the word novella. It comes from the word novel, and when you add la, means it's a small one. For example, you have Elizabeth, then you have little Elizabeth, who is called the Isabelita. Then you have Eva, then you have Evita. All these people have a formal name and a little name. So the little name would change it somewhat to become ending with an A. So you have novella, which means a small novel. And this book is called Breakfast at Tiffany's. And I bet many people have seen this movie with Audrey Hepburn and George Peppard. And his works have been adapted into more than 20 movies and television dramas. So his works were very popular. He was most famous for this new journalism novel or true crime. It's called In Cold Blood. It's about a murder case, and he spent years researching and interviewing these two murderers in jail and interviewing lots of people. Anyway, it became a huge, thick book that won great prizes, probably a Pulitzer Prize, I believe. And he spent years writing that book, and he's very helpful and a quiet friend, Harper Lee, helped him a great deal doing this book. At the same time, Harper Lee was writing her own novel, which is called To Kill a Mockingbird. That, arguably speaking, could be an even more famous book than any of Truman Capote's books. Harper Lee wrote just one book, and it was a killer of a book, To Kill a Mockingbird. And it's got Gregory Peck, who I think he won an Oscar for it. Yeah. 这个中文叫什么呢？杀死一只模仿鸟, I guess. It is totally a story about Black Lives Matters, because there was a black man who was accused of killing a white man or a white woman. No, not a woman. Okay, he killed actually, he probably didn't kill. Yeah,
he didn't kill the man.
Yeah,
but tried to molest the woman.
Yes. He was accused of molesting that woman. Yeah, that woman accused him because the woman was a young girl, and his father was very angry seeing that this girl was flirting with the black man. So the father wanted to kill this young man, and this young man was accused of molesting that young girl, and he eventually died from transport between the prison to prison, because he was totally innocent, and Gregory Peck was the lawyer defending him, but the whole town just wanted to kill him. There's no way he could save this young man. That was one of the very early books about the injustice against Black people in America. That was a wonderful book. Yeah. Harper Lee was a young woman when she wrote that story, probably from her own experience, from the point of view of a young girl who watched all these crazy things happening in her world and couldn't make sense of it. Yeah. Okay, so these are Truman Capote's books: Breakfast at Tiffany's, which was made into a movie, and In Cold Blood, which was made into a movie. And there are movies about Truman Capote. There are more than 4 here. The first one is a stage show, which is a one-man show, which means there's only one actor on the stage for 2-3 hours, just one person playing Truman Capote, and this person was Robert Morse, and he got lots of awards for this one-man show. However, later on, he played the same story, but in a bigger cast. So there were other actors in addition to Truman Capote. So he also got an Emmy Award for that. Later on, there was a show called the Truman Capote Talk Show, in which an actor, here's the name, Bob Kingdom, he was on stage playing Truman Capote, who looks back over his own life. Then all of a sudden, in 2005 and 2006, back and back, there are two Truman Capote biographies. One is garnered more attention than the other. It was played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, who not too long ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, died of an overdose of heroin. A wonderful actor, Philip Seymour Hoffman. He was playing Truman Capote during the time he was writing the book In Cold Blood. And almost the same year, we have a different movie called The Infamous. Infamous was in which Toby Jones played Capote and Sandra Bullock played Harper Lee. These are all quite serious books exploring Truman Capote's life. I was here, and here we have these two posters. This is Seymour Hoffman. I forgot his middle name. Philip Seymour Hoffman, okay. And this is Jones, okay. And this beautiful young woman grew old to be like this, just like us. Okay, her name is Joan Didion, born in 1934. She was also a journalist, but she writes fictions and nonfiction, screenplays and plays. And she has a husband who passed away about 15 years ago or 16 years ago. And at that time, after 2005, she won the National Book Award for this book, which is called The Year of Magical Thinking. That's the story of herself, autobiography about the life she had with her husband, who recently passed away. And she turned it into a stage play played by Vanessa Redgrave. And later it became a Broadway play, yeah. And before that, she was very famous for writing a critique of about Central Part 5. There were 5 young boys accused of raping and killing a white woman, and they were totally innocent, and the world just wanted to kill them for that alleged crime, which they did not commit. And Joan Didion was the first to write about the injustice behind this. She investigated and she proposed that these young men are innocent. So now we really, truly, after George Floyd, is that George Floyd or Floyd George? I guess it's George Floyd. Yeah, since George Floyd was killed by the police in public eye, we really, the whole world knew that Black people were living dangerously in this country because a lot of people just want them dead. They failed to realize that these people did not want to be here to begin with. It is your ancestor who kidnapped them and shipped them here and put them in slavery. And now you don't want them to stay in your country. That is how ironic. Anyway, so she was very much reporting the counterculture in the 60s. So she did a lot of writing about the people like the hippies or people who are, I wouldn't say curious, people who don't trust the government. Yeah, after the Vietnam War, people don't trust the government, and there's the counterculture in United States where young people grew up not wanting to obey the laws or obey the rules because the rules were made by some people who were not fair. Okay, so such as proposing to exonerate the Central Park Five. But in her old age, she wrote this book called The Year of Magical Thinking that made her famous again. And she's still living. Many of these people I'm telling you today are dead already, like Tennessee Williams and Truman Capote. This is one of Joan Didion's early stories that was made into movies played by Tuesday Weld and Anthony Perkins. These were movie stars who were young when we were young, and they were long gone. Yeah, Anthony Perkins was gay, and he died of AIDS quite early on. And she also wrote the script for A Star Is Born. It is just one of many A Star is Born in movie. This one stars Barbara Streisand and the Chris Christopherson. This is about popular hot music. The previous version I saw with Judy Garland and James Mason. They were a generation before these people, and they were movie people, not singers. And the later one, more recent one, having Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga recently won a lot of Oscars. And they were about popular singers, yes. So this script was written by John Gregory Dunn, his wife Joan Didion, and others. The others meaning the director, Frank Pearson. So John Gregory Dunn and Joan Didion, they were soulmates. They worked together quite often. For example, the script for this movie was written by them, and in many other movies and other works. But when the husband died, the wife was heartbroken. She spent a whole year, she did not know how to handle her life until she finally got through the depression. And this is another movie they worked together on, which is called Up Close and Personal. It has Robert Redford and Michelle Pfeiffer. And this is a so-called true story about a real person. However, in the process of being changed to adapt it into a movie from the book, a lot of things changed, and people say it's not the story of that person anymore. So this is one example of a true story which turned into something that's totally a fiction. Who's the leading character, the true story about? It's Jessica Savage. She was a young woman, a news anchor woman. Now, she was very famous. Suddenly she became famous in the world of only older male anchors. She was a breath of fresh air or something. You could say that she broke many glass ceilings to become famous as a news broadcasting woman. However, in the process, there are a lot of things involved in her life that she finally killed herself early in her life. So it's a tragic story. And apparently, according to this movie, there is an older man who gave her a mentor. We say mentor is that an older person, by example and by teaching, would bring up a younger person who is inexperienced. This is a word called mentor. To teach a younger person by leading the way and feeding the knowledge and experience on the younger person. That is to act as a mentor. And here is the year of magical thinking about her husband. And this play was played by Vanessa Redgrave. It's again a sole cast member. That is a one-woman show. There are quite a few one-man show in history, but the one-woman show is rarer. As I can remember, there's a one-woman show playing. Who's the poet in New England? The woman.
Jessica Platt.
No, or older in maybe 150 years ago. She was never married.
George Sand.
No, that's French. I'm talking about a lady in Amherst. You know, Amherst is in Massachusetts.
Yes. Virginia Woolf.
No, Virginia Woolf is also from England. She was one of the Doonesbury ladies. I'm talking about a woman who was wearing total. I drove with death. That's one of her poems about it. Death and me. We were riding on the carriage and passed by my house. That's one of her poems. Yeah. How could I forget? I can do that. Okay. How do I check that? Death. Right. I can't find it. Anyway, a very famous woman. That's one woman show. And for men, I've heard of many one-man show like Abe Lincoln or what's that? Charles Darwin or Henry Fonda playing Inherit the Wind. How do you call that? Not H.L. Mencken, but the trial lawyer was. Anyway, there are tons of one-man show out there, but women show I could only remember two, and I could not remember all the names. Anyway, it is a very, very taxing role to play if you are the only person on the stage in order to gather all the attention of the people so that people would not fall to sleep. That's a very difficult job. Okay.
Is it Sylvia Plath? No.
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 Much older. 一个
Hmm.
老小姐了. Sylvia Plath committed suicide because of trouble in marriage. But we're talking about a maiden, a spinster woman. Let me continue because we don't have much time. There's Hunter Thompson. These are all writers with a rebellious streak. He lived with the motorcycle gang, Hell's Angels, for a year, doing everything with them together in order to write an article about a book about this. The book is called Hell's Angel, of course. And he also wrote Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved. You know from the title that it is an expose of some kind. So he, as a journalist, would really delve into the investigation and sometimes even playing the major role in the story himself, like in the book called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It was turned into a movie several times. These are the posters for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's about his own life, actually. You got Johnny Depp, Terry Gilliams of Monty Python, Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro. And here we have this one was played by Bill Murray. Okay. And the last one is Tom Wolfe. He did a big book called The Right Stuff. He's one of the people associated with new journalism. He spent years and years researching the Apollo project, the NASA project of putting a man or two men on the moon. That is a big project. He investigated everything about all the astronauts, their lives, and all kinds of things. And he says his aim is to write books in the tradition of Charles Dickens, Emile Zola, and John Steinbeck. And that's very high goals. And the first book he became famous for is the electric Kool-Aid acid test about Ken Casey, who is the original writer of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he really became famous for writing The Right Stuff about the Mercury 7 astronauts, including the 7 astronauts and those who did not make it, such as, I forgot the name again, played by Sam Shepard. So these are all astronauts. There are 7 of them plus many more, yeah. So it really takes a lot of investigation, a lot of work to write stories totally about everyone's detailed thinking so that you would understand why they do things. They are real people, And this is another one he wrote called Bonfire of the Vanities. It turned into a movie with Tom Hanks and Melanie Griffith and Bruce Willis. And Tom Wolfe, there's another novelist earlier than him called Thomas Wolfe, who wrote not Western Hope. Look Homeward Angels. Yeah, Look Homeward Angel. And so you have to make a distinction between Thomas Wolfe and the Tom Wolfe. And Tom Wolfe, in addition to writing all those things that I just mentioned, he also wrote this book on the new journalism. He wants people to understand how this group of people started this kind of movement, how they did and what they did and so on. So this is not a fiction or a nonfiction. It is about their own work, the new journalism. Okay. This I talked about last time. Here we have due process. I only did one slide on due process. This is the central philosophy of this country. Everyone who was accused of a crime must be offered due process. You cannot just say, oh, he's a criminal, let's just throw him in jail and kill him. No, in this country, you have to be proven guilty. Before you're proven guilty, you're innocent. This is a crucial difference between America and all the other countries, even in England. This came from Magna Carta. 这里, I have Magna Carta here. 这是大宪章. In the year 1215, we had King John. King John is the younger brother of Richard the Lionheart. He signed off on Magna Carta, admitting that a king is not above everything, and we have to follow the rules, and we have to get the agreement of the parliament and things like that. And the due process appeared first in human history in Magna Carta. It says that the private citizen must be protected from the prosecution of law when the government is trying to hunt down bad guys. A singular person must be offered this protection from the law. Okay, so the English law and American law gradually changed. America kept this idea of due process, while English laws got away from it. They do not offer so much due process to the regular people. I'm just talking about it very briefly. And maybe someday we're going to delve into it. Here we have the word thou, which means you. Thou means you, and thee means you as this object. You do something to you, then it's do something to thee. I should say first that thou is the old word for you. In the beginning, the people only say thou. There was no you. Then we have you, and we gradually only say you, and we don't say thou. But in the older, for example, poetries or in screenplays by Shakespeare, you would see people saying thou, thee, thine, thy. These words, they are the equivalent of you, but in an archaic form, 就是老的哈。So 一 means 多数的 you 哈，这个 thee 呢 means as an object, you do something to thee, and thy means your, or thine is the word thy, but when it's before a vowel, 就是在母音或者在 silent h 前面的时候，就要用 thine 哈，那这个 thyself 就等于 yourself， 这些都是 older words, but you should know it existed. Sometimes it was, you can find it in older, the Bible or something 哈，这些都不是很重要哈。Remember that you need to know the two words, optimistic and the pessimistic. And the cicada, you can watch that thing, huh? This map I was not able to show you the other day, 2 weeks ago, because my computer stopped working. And there are two kinds of periodical cicadas. One is 17-year cicada, and one is 13-year cicada. So they would get hatched, go underground for 17 years or 13 years, and then they come out and they mate and they bear eggs and they lay eggs, and the eggs got hatched, and those new generation would go down underground. However, there's more difference than that. So the 17-year cicadas, there are brood 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until brood 14. Okay, so there are all kinds of this kind of cicada that would come every 17 years, but the year that they last appeared was 13 and it's 14 and so on. The one that we're talking about this year, 2021, is brood 10, and this is a 17-year, of course, a 17-year cicada. But this year, if you see any of them, they are brood 10 because others do not come out this year. So this, if you look for this kind, the yellow kinds, they're here and here and here. That's where I used to live last time when it came out, and a little bit here. These kinds in the south, they are the 13-year kinds. Okay. This is weird. They have this number of years that is a prime number. That means this number is not divisible by any smaller number. For example, 12, you can divide it by 2, 4, 6, and so on. But 17, you cannot divide it by anything. That's called a prime number. This is a cicada coming out of the shell. And this is antenna. Oh, people would call these antenna. Well, an animal having antenna would be like this, called the 触角. I'm just showing some pictures. It's not just insect. You have lobsters and crab. They also have antennas. And the membrane, we're talking about the cicada having the transparent wings. So their wings are like membranous. Okay. And then there are the words that you may want to know, but it's not everyday words. You have eggs, and you have the grown up animal, which is called the imago. And in between, you have maochong. A caterpillar is a larva, and you have jian, the pupa, or there you have chrysalis. It's a 蝴蝶的茧蛹哈，叫做 chrysalis. And I have some picture of these. Okay, these are, lava, and these are pupa, and these are chrysalis. And these are nymphs. They are younger animals, but they are no longer lava or pupa or chrysalis. They are in some animal form, but still not totally adult form. And this is the adult chengchong, huh? And this is Inghuochong. I keep forgetting it's called the firefly. And I do not usually call it lightning bug, but every time I want to say, I could only remember the word lightning bug. I could not remember the word fireflies. Okay, and now let us read this one, huh? I had a recommended video. You can go home to watch it. It was presented by Dr. Andrew Barker, who could speak infinitely better than I do. You can know the in and out of all the words and lines in this poem. This is read by...
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
Okay. As I just mentioned, this is a not easy one. It's very famous, and many people on YouTube are telling you what it means, each word, each line, and so on. So you can spend a lot of time watching them. There are many, many people interpreting this. And in our school days, we learned English the most simple ways. We learn easy words and the easy articles. We do not know much at all about poetry. And when you first try to read some of them, you find it difficult. It's very different from Chinese poems. Chinese, I'm not going to say much about it. I cannot compare the two kinds, but I can only say that I have difficulty understanding the English poems. That's why I try to take you with me on my journey. When I gradually learn a little bit of it, And for example, these lines are all iambic pentameter lines. Each line has 10 syllables. You may have some words with 2 syllables. 就是两个音节, for example, lightning is definitely 2 syllables. But if you read it carefully, you can see it is combined of 5 2-syllable parts. And when you read it, it goes like, do not go gentle into that good night. Anyway, I cannot do it well, okay? So these are called the iambic pentameters. And you see some lines are repeated, sometimes in the same position, sometimes in a different position. And this is the first time I learned that there is a kind of English poems that is this kind of poem in which you have this line repeated here and here and here. Oh, let me see this. What happened to this? Okay, so this is an image I grabbed from Dr. Andrew Barker's interpretation of this poem. And you can see some lines are blue and some are red, and they are not very easy to read. So I typed them so you can see them. I did not type them. I just grabbed them and I color them in different colors. So the first line is do not go gentle into that good night. And this appeared as the last line of the second stanza. I hope you remember the word stanza, which means a paragraph of several lines in a poem. So the second stanza has a line, last line the same, and the fourth stanza has the last line that is the same, and it appears again as the third but not the last line of the last quatrain. So this poem has many parts, many stanzas, and these are all 3 lines, all of them except for the last one, which is a quatrain that has 4 lines. So this is a form of poem that has 2 beautiful lines that are got repeated again and again, which you don't see in most other poems in the Chinese or not Chinese. You do not see them repeating the same lines all the time. So it is brand new to me to know that in this kind of poem, which is called, this form is called the villanelle. This kind of 格式, a kind of format. It has 5 tercets, that means 5 3-line stanzas, and 1 quatrain, and in which you have the first line repeated 4 times, and the last line of the first stanza repeated also several times. So this is, I suspect that you have never heard of such a format, so we are learning it together. So in this, it's not a very long poem, but you got 2 brilliant lines repeated again and again, in which he also put in different things. For example, wise man. Here we have wise men and the grave man and all kinds of men. And when he says good man, this man is no longer a light word. So in this rhythm of iambic pentameter, it's this word man broke this rhythm. You say, you were saying it da 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 da, but when you come to the line with good man or wise man, you would say good man. So it broke that rhythm. Just watch that professor's interpretation, and you can learn a great deal about this poem. Enough for me to say a few things about this writer, Dylan Thomas, who died very young at 39. And he drinks a lot. Everybody knows he is an alcoholic. So he is a roistering, drunken, and doomed poet, and he died very young. And he started to write very early in life, as before he was a teenager, I would say. So the poem was written because toward the end he said, you, my father. That means he's writing this to his father. He is thinking that his father is close to old age, and he encouraged his father to do not go gentle into the good night, rage against the dying of the light. This is a whole purpose, whole goal of his poem, which really inspired a lot of people, people like us who are dying, may I say that? And we look back at our life and what we did or what we regret, and we wish at the last minute we are not going away quietly. Well, that is his view as a young man. He encourages his father to be defiant. So I'm picking this poem because the two most famous line tells you to not go gentle into the good night, and to rage. That is the whole purpose of this poem, is to rage against the dying of the light. And I paired this with the poem by Li Shangyin, which we will talk about in a minute. And he died, his father actually died later, not when he wrote this. He wrote it in 1947, and his father died later in 1952, okay? Yeah, he became famous very quickly, and he's a Welsh poet, but all his poems were written in English. He's very influential. And even though he became very famous very early on, he still needs more income to survive. So he came to United States many times to go on reading trips. People would go to the theater to hear him read his own poems. Welsh is the part that's bordered in red in this picture. You can see this. This is Welsh. We always say there are Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland, but these parts are very different from each other. For example, Ireland has always been many steps lower to England. They were treated like slaves. And Scotland, because they had a king, that became an English king. So they're more or less on the equal footing because their king became the King of England. However, Wales is always in the supportive role. They were always being controlled by England, and they are looked down upon as inferior. However, they were not as low as Ireland. So this guy is from Wales. And this is about the iambic pentameter, which I don't expect you to remember. You don't have to. We're just being exposed to the different forms, which show that their poetry is a different creature, very different from our poems. This is a poem by Sylvia Plath, which I think it was who just mentioned her name. And this is a poem by Sylvia Plath, which is in the same form. You can see that there are 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, and at the end there's a 4 line. And each line, for example, the first paragraph, she had the first line and the last line that were repeated again and again. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I lift my lids and all is born again. I think I made you up inside my head. So this is very cute, and these lines gets repeated throughout this poem. And this Professor Andrew Barker, and from that link you will be able to go to see his YouTube video about this very poems. And since I found this, I've watched more than a dozen of his other poems. Each one is so illuminating. By myself, I would never have guessed that these poems were telling the story the way he's telling them. So I was very happy to have found his website. But as I just mentioned, there are tons of people out there doing the same thing. Let's come back to this one, why I picked this. And I told you about this Huang Xiaodan. She had a video that I recommended to you about mostly Wang Wei's Shi and some other Tang Shi. It's called 随时间而来的真理. It's about the life process of life. You grow up and so on and so forth. In the end, you die. And she particularly picked this Li Shangyin's poem that is saying that do not go gentle into the night. Rage against the dying of the light. It's all encapsulated here, called 旦夕流尘暗烛房. According to Huang Xiaodan, this is a poem about do not let your life just flow away like an ordinary thing. You would rather live a much shorter life, but you want it to be brilliant. This is exactly what Dylan Thomas was talking about. Okay, and this is not what everyone was talking about other than Huang Xiaodan. When you look for this poem, they're not talking about that. They're talking about Li Shangyin's wife died and he grieved. He missed his dead wife so much that he wrote this. But to Huang Xiaodan, this is about rage against the dying of the light. Okay, so there are different ways to look at the same line. Let's look at this 昨夜不惜决堤度年方 旦夕流尘暗烛房 昨夜西池凉露满 桂花吹断月中香. Here we have 决堤, which is a cuckoo bird. And in Chinese tradition, ever since Qu Yuan, they were using cuckoo bird to mean that when you hear the cuckoo bird sing, it means spring is over. The best thing in your year is over. And you should feel so sad because by that time, all the flowers would be faded and all the birds would stop singing. However, Li Shangyin is saying, 不辞提决度年方. I never worry about cuckoo bird crowing, which signals the end of spring, because I just want to rage against the dying of the light. 他说旦夕流尘暗烛房. 烛房 is a part of the candle that's burning. Maybe it looks like the shape of a house or a tent. But when you have a candle, sometimes dust falls into this pool of melted wax. And when that happens, the light would not be so strong. This is about the time when people entirely use the candles to light. They don't have light bulbs, they don't have a cell phone, they don't have anything. They just rely on the candle all day, all night. So they were looking at this candle and see how it burns. They spend hours looking at the candle. And they know that when it's dusty, the light would be dimmed. But the candle would light for a longer time because it's not burning so bright. But this poem, this line is particularly saying, you don't care. I don't care about the cuckoo bird singing, and I don't care about the spring going away. But I care about the dust causing the candle to not burn bright. I want my life to be burning bright, even though it's a shorter life. This is how the whole thing this line is about is I don't want it to be short. I don't want to be long. I'd rather having a short life, but I want it to burn bright. Okay. However, most people read this poem, they're looking at this 昨夜西池凉露满，桂花吹断月中香, which means it was cold in the night last night and the dewdrops filled up my pond. And I look at the moon, I expect to smell the fragrance of the osmanthus or laurel tree in the moon. In our legends, we say that there is a osmanthus tree in the moon. And we expect when the moon is shining so bright, we should be able to smell, that fragrance. However, because of the wind blowing and this fragrance was not able to reach me, the fragrance from the moon. And most people read and say he is missing his wife. And there are many things that tells you that he's missing his wife. However, in the eyes of the Huang Xiaodan, he is saying that I'd rather have a shorter and brilliant life instead of a long and ordinary life. Okay. This poems being about his dead wife, because he used these words from Pan Yue the Dao Wang Shi. Dao Wang Shi is poems in memory of a dead wife, because they are all men, so it's about their wives. Very few women in the history would write poems about their dead husband. So it's always about a dead wife. And many of these poets would have a wonderful wife who died very early on, young. There are tons of them out there. So there is one particular genre of Chinese poetry called poems in memory of my dead wife. One of the very early one was Pan Yue. He was very early in Hanchao, and he was famous for writing poems and the fu on his dead wife. Heartbreaking lines about it. So when Li Shangyin writes a line that implies that he was thinking about Pan Yue's dead wife, from the line 床空伟清晨, 床空伟清晨, it implies this part about 旦夕流尘暗烛房, and also it says his beloved wife is dead and he is really sad thinking about his wife. He probably did not sleep at all, and he saw the pool brimming with more water from the dewdrops, I guess. So most people say this poem was his deep feeling. It says that expresses the deep feeling he had for his dead wife. However, I take Wang Xiaodan's interpretation saying that Li Shangyin would rather have a brilliant short life than a long and ordinary life, just as Dylan Thomas was saying. Now, Dylan Thomas really died young, and it really matched his thinking of having a short life but brilliant. Okay, and that is all I have for today. It's a little bit shorter than usual, so it's good, but still not good enough. Anyway, do you have anything to say?
I just thought about that Jessica Savage, that anchor woman. I believe, because at the time I was in Philadelphia going to school there, I believe she died of a tragic death of drowning.
Drowning, okay.
Yeah.
It's not a normal death. She
No.
died.
Yeah, and I think she was hooked on cocaine or some kind of
Yes, she was into drugs.
yeah,
Yes,
because it was very competitive field
yes,
at that time.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Uh-huh.
yeah.
And that New England poet is Emily Dickinson. Okay,
Oh,
gotcha. Okay, yeah, there was a one woman show about her. She has a very different life compared to other poets because
mhm.
she was a single woman and she's constantly thinking about death. And it's her poetry, her poems none of them were published during her life. So she never enjoyed any fame or profit. Yeah, she just died a old maid,
Mhm.
maybe not too old either, but she was never famous. But
Okay.
now she's a very important American poet.
Mhm. Okay. Oh, another question. Now I noticed talking about maiden name. I noticed the recent years, women having a career, they want to keep their maiden name, but also showing their married name. So they have this hyphenated last name. So do you so you put your own maiden name first, then your married name, or the other way
Well,
around?
you're on your own. You do whatever you like. Yeah.
Oh,
For example, some like Hillary, she would put her maiden name to become middle name, so she does not use a hyphen. Hyphen is
yeah,
more a new thing, so it would
yeah.
show that you're not traditional. And Hillary did not want to break the rules, so she used her
Roden, yeah.
some people, for example, President Kennedy's mother, and she came from a very well-known family in Ireland, and her last name, her maiden name was Fitzgerald. So when she got married, she did not give up her maiden name, but she still adopted the husband's last name. So Fitzgerald was in the middle, and the Kennedy, JFK, he had his mother's maiden name as his middle name. So he's John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It's just so that he doesn't give up the good name of her mother's family, because his father, his mother's family name, but his father, Mr. Kennedy, is not from a good family.
No.
So he's like a pirate kind of businessman doing
Yeah.
lots of bad things. So when they grow up, they all keep their mother's maiden name. And I don't know if all of them do, but John F. Kennedy certainly kept his mother's middle name, the maiden name, as his own middle name.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Emily Dickinson is very famous.
Emily
Yeah.
Dickinson. Okay.
Yes. Mhm. But Sylvia Plath is also, but she's 100 years younger. And she became very famous when she was a teenager. Yeah. She won a prize and became famous overnight, and then went to England and married a handsome young poet. They were a wonderful couple, the best poets in the whole world. And then the marriage broke apart, so he killed himself. She killed herself. I'm sorry. She killed herself, and her husband married another woman who also killed herself in the same way, which is to stick your head into your gas oven and breathe in that gas. That's some way to kill yourself.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay.